Hello again everyone and welcome back to Electro Tech 5. We have about thousands of islands in the world. Some of us are up from a romantic island getaway filled with sand, sun, and so much fun. Who wouldn't be? Even so, there are still plenty of island destinations that offer up some pretty bizarre and unique experiences. So join me for today's video as we go over the top 15 strangest islands in existence. Some of these islands are stunningly beautiful, some are downright odd, and a few of them are even a little bit dangerous. But maybe, if you're lucky and adventurous, you'll be able to visit them someday. Number 15. Socotra Island, Yemen. Socotra, an island in the Indian Ocean about 210 miles southeast of Yemen, to which it belongs, is the largest of several islands extending eastward from the Horn of Africa. In its interior, you can find the Hajar Mountain with narrow coastal plains in the north and a broader plain in the south. Socotra's name is traced to the Sanskrit Vipa Sokadara, Island Abode of Bliss. The island is mentioned in various legends. The inhabitants were Christians, but that religion disappeared from the island in the 17th century. Socotra was long ruled by the Mara Sultans of southeastern Yemen that was interrupted by Portuguese between 1507 and 1511. In 1834, the British failed to purchase the islands. However, the Sultan accepted the British protection for the entire Sultanate in 1880. The Sultanate was ended in 1967 when Socotra became part of the independent South Yemen that later became Unified Yemen. The island's sedentary inhabitants are engaged in fishing, pearl diving, and small-scale agriculture. Nomads keep cattle and other animals and graze some crops. But in November 2015, it was devastated when hit by two powerful cyclones only days apart. Since Yemen is engulfed in a civil war, the island was dependent on relief from other countries like UAE, which subsequently set up a military base on the island in part to support the separatist Southern Transitional Council in southern Yemen. After the STC began challenging the internationally recognized government in Aden, its erstwhile ally against the Houthis in the civil war, Socotra became a battleground between the two factions in 2020. Number 14. Bouvet Island, Norway. Located towards the bottom of the South Atlantic Ocean, it's generally windswept, frequently fog-shrouded, and mostly covered by a glacier. A dependency of Norway and declared a nature reserve in the 1970s, no one lives there, and it's visited only infrequently by Norwegian polar expeditions. Bouvet Island is a candidate for the most remote island in the world. The island is named to a French navigator who discovered the island. His name is Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet de Lougère. However, its position was not accurately fixed and Bouvet did not circumnavigate his discovery, so it was unclear if it was an island or part of a continent. Not until 1808, it was rediscovered by one Lindsay, the captain of Enderby Company Whaler Swan. He was the first to correctly fix the island position even if he didn't land. What's so strange about it apart from being a remote island? In 1964, there was an abandoned lifeboat discovered along with various supplies. However, the lifeboat's passengers were never found. And despite being uninhabited, the island has the Internet Country Code top-level domain. Even if it's not used, and a handful of amateur radio expeditions have gone to this remote location. Number 13. The Vulcan Point in the Philippines. The tiny little island of Vulcan Point in the Philippines is the world's largest island within a lake that is situated on an island, Taal Island, located in a lake, Lake Taal, within an island, Luzon. Up until 2012, a 4-acre strip of nameless island across the center of a small lake encapsulated by a slightly larger island that resides inside one of a series of long finger lakes located 75 miles inland from the southern coast of Victoria Island. A land feature in northern Canada currently holds the title. Number 12. Padiute Shell Island. An island made out of shells, including a cemetery. One of the strangest islands you could ever visit because you will hear a disconcerting crunching sound when you walk on the ground. Because the ground isn't made out of sand or rock but has been formed by the accumulation of layer upon layer of millions of shells that was discarded by clam fishermen over generations. The streets are paved with shells, and the buildings are also constructed from shells. Have you ever heard of that peculiar shells construction? Known also for its cemetery, the second island is also completely made out of shells. Although its simple and barren landscape could easily be ignored, the island is in fact special. 90% of people in Senegal adhere to Islam, yet This entire island attached to Fat Youth is dedicated to a cemetery of simple graves marked by white Christian crosses. Also buried in shells, the cemetery is a strange monument to the minority religion of the nation and has adapted to the island's shell landscape to form a beautiful graveyard. Number 11. Sable Island. Isolated and remote, the famous Sable Island is a wild and wind-swept island of sands that sits far out the North Atlantic, where wild horses roam freely and the world's largest breeding colony of gray seals occupy its extensive beaches. Plants, birds, and insects have adapted to life on the island. Who would have thought that even if it's an isolated island, Zoe Lucas, a naturalist, has lived there for about 40 years. He visited the island in 1971 when he was first a student. Do you know that the wild ponies of the Sable Islands are the national park's most famous residents? Well, if you're quite curious seeing those animals, and if you have an ocean-worthy boat or a friend with one, you can sail to Sable Island. You just need to register with Parks Canada. Whether it's the wildlife, the shipwrecks, or an unparalleled sense of solitude amidst a vast expanse of sea, Sable Island promises the trip in a lifetime to every visitor. Number 10. Clipperton Island. Located 1,120 kilometers in the southwest of Mexico, French-administered Clipperton Island is the only atoll in the tropical eastern Pacific. It's named after English pirate John Clipperton, who's said to have used it as a hideout in the early 18th century. Later, the island proved to be inhospitable during attempts to establish guano mining operations and small settlements there, and it remains uninhabited today. It is called the Strangest Island because of its extraordinary feature, the biologically significant interior lagoon that has no outlet to the sea. Having a strong vertical salinity gradient, the lagoon is rich in nutrients and supports the abundance of plant life, including extensive seagrass beds covering 45% of its surface. If anyone would like to visit the island, you'll have to go by your own boat or join an expedition as there are no other sources of transportation. Number 9. Pig Beach in Bog Major Cay, Bahamas. Just south of the tip of Florida are the stunning islands of the Bahamas. The Caribbean nation calls 700 islands home and has some of the most pristine waters in the world. And while millions of people travel to the islands to visit Atlantis, the Exuma Islands are getting more play these days thanks to one oinky reason: Pig Beach. You're probably thinking how many pigs are in this island and why is it called Pig Beach? Well, this is one experience you simply can't miss while you're here. If you're wondering how the pigs got to the beach, we don't know for sure. Big Major Cay is uninhabited and the pigs are not native to the island. Some say they were left by a group of sailors who planned to come back and cook them, or that the pigs swam over from a shipwreck nearby. Wherever they came from, there are now about 20 pigs and piglets living the easy life with daily visits from Bahamians and tourists. Number 8. Gayola Island. Did you know that Gayola Island is known as the Cursed Island? You'll find out why. Sola de Gayola is a small but beautifully formed island just the Gulf of Naples, where the rocky shores are lapped by emerald waters clear enough for glimpses of the submerged ancient ruins below. There's even a private villa from which to enjoy the spectacular panoramic views. The island remains abandoned and many locals refuse to go near it for the fear of becoming the next victim of the island's curse. The island actually comprises two islets connected by a narrow stone bridge just a few meters in length. At one time, it was known as Euclea and was considered the protector of safe navigation. Noble Romans built holiday homes across the scenic stretch of the coast, and the remains of an Imperial Age villa can be seen today in the clear water surrounding the island. Some scholars believe that Virgil, one of Rome's greatest poets, taught there. So, where did it all go wrong for Isola della Gaiola? The run of bad luck might have started in the 1800s when a hermit known as El Mago or the Wizard lived on the island. Isolated from the community, save for the occasional handout from local fishermen, El Mago lived a solitary existence. So there was no one to provide an explanation when he simply vanished without a trace, never to be seen again. Luigi de Negri was the next resident. He built the spacious villa that still stands on the island today, but he suffered financial ruin shortly after. In 1911, Captain Gaspare Albenga was piloting his ship around the island, apparently considering buying it, when he crashed into rocks and drowned. Some sources say that the story was even more dramatic and that his ship didn't sink, but it disappeared, along with the captain himself. More misfortune followed in the 1920s when the Swiss owner of the villa, Hans Braun, was murdered. His body was found wrapped in a rug in his own home. His widow drowned in sea shortly after. The next owner had a heart attack, and another committed suicide in a mental hospital. The island once belonged to Gianni Agnelli, the head of Fiat, who transformed the Italian company into a global brand and became Italy's richest man in the process. Despite his success, Agnelli experienced many personal hardships in life. His son's body was found under a bridge in an apparent suicide, and his nephew died from a rare form of cancer at age 33. Billionaire tycoon John Paul Getty was the next high-profile person connected to the island. In 1973, the Calabrian mafia known as the 'Ndrangheta kidnapped his grandson. The kidnappers eventually sent him the voice-severed ear in the post, prompting Getty to hand over nearly $3 million for his safe return. Today, the island is part of the Guayla Underwater Park, a protected marine area owned by the region of Campania. Those brave enough to ignore the curse can reach Isola de la Gaiola with a short swim from the mainland. Number 7. Isla Urus, Peru. What is special about the Urus Islands of Peru? Well, the fairy tale-like Urus Islands are entirely made out from totora reeds. The lives of the inhabitants of these artificial islands are entirely dependent upon the reed beds they live among. Just 4.3 miles or 7 kilometers east of Puno, these unique floating islands are Lake Titicaca's top attraction. Their uniqueness is due to their construction. The lives of the Urus people are interwoven with these reeds. Partially edible, tasting like non-sweet sugarcane, the reeds are also used to build homes, boats, and crafts. The islands are constructed from many layers of the totora, which are constantly replenished from the top as they rot from the bottom. So, the ground is always soft and springy. Intermarriage with Aymara-speaking indigenous people has seen the demise of original Uros, who nowadays all speak Aymara. Always a small group, the Uros began their unusual floating existence centuries ago in an effort to isolate themselves from the aggressive Collas and Incas. The popularity of the islands has led to aggressive commercialization in some cases. The most traditional reed islands are located further from Puno through a maze of small channels, only visited by private boats. Islanders there continue to live in a relatively traditional fashion and prefer not to be photographed. Number 6. Okunoshima Island, Japan. You've heard about pigs ruling an island. This time, we'll talk about an island where rabbits rule. Yes, you heard it right. Rabbits rule this island. They are well-fed, free from predators, and spend their time lounging around getting photographed by fawning humans. So where's this bunny paradise? It's a small island in Seto Inland Sea called Okunoshima, 2 miles off the coast of the Japanese city in Takehara in Hiroshima Prefecture. These days though, it's most often referred to by its nickname, Usagi-jima, which translates to Rabbit Island, and is named after the hundreds of feral rabbits that call it home. It's a bit of a mystery how all these bunnies ended up on a tiny island whose previous claim to fame was a spot where the Japanese Imperial Army manufactured thousands of tons of poison gas during World War II in a facility. To keep it secret, the island was removed from all Japanese maps. According to the New York Times, the poison, mustard gas, phosgene, and other types, was used against Chinese soldiers and civilians in the 1930s and 40s during the war in China, killing about 80,000 people by some estimates. Some believe the island's terrible history may hold the key to why rabbits now call it home. Back in 1929, when the army began manufacturing chemical weapons, rabbits were brought to the island and used to test the effectiveness of the poison gas. This gave rise to the belief that workers may have released the captive animals onto the island following the war. Most experts disagree with this version of events though. Ellis Krauss, a professor of Japanese politics at the University of California in San Diego, told the website The Dodo in a 2014 interview that the original rabbits were wiped out after the war. Up until now, just like those pigs, we still don't know where these rabbits came from. Number 5. Palm Islands, Dubai. At the beginning of the 21st century, Dubai experienced a frenzy of urban development, positioning the Arab Emirate as the capital of eccentricities and architectural records. The most ambitious project was the construction of the Palm Islands, which was later joined by the World and the Universe archipelagos. Promoted as an oasis of luxury that has reclaimed land from the sea, Palm Islands is made up of Palm Jumeirah, Palm, Jebel Ali, and Palm Deer, and was first visited in December 2020. In 20 years, numerous different problems have led to delays in the works. Non-payment, debts, legal problems, and irreparable environmental impact, some islands sinking back into the sea. Despite all these unforeseen circumstances that have threatened the feasibility of the project, the developer Nakil is not giving up on it. Palm Jumeirah is probably the most successful of the 3 Palm Islands, much better connected to Dubai than the world archipelago. It's extensively developed and hosts numerous businesses, hotels, and housing units, ranging from apartments to large single-home residences. It serves as a semi-secluded luxury destination for wealthy individuals from all over the world. The rest of the islands, however, remain rather underdeveloped, if not desolate. Despite the extraordinary publicity received by such bold projects, other than Palm Jumeirah, the man-made islands of Dubai are sparsely inhabited. While some of them are privately owned, its current situation can be easily checked without having to delve deep into Dubai's cadastral records. A quick look from space through tools such as Google Maps is enough to verify that despite the numerous effort involved, the island remains largely underdeveloped. Number 4. Deer Island, New York. After pigs and rabbits, now we'll talk about Deer Island. You're probably thinking, is the island known for deers? Are there deers discovered swimming in the island or perhaps lounging in the island? Deer Island is located just north of Alexandria Bay, New York. It's a 50-acre island containing diverse topography and varied shoreline. Deer Island was one of the first islands in what has become known as the Thousand Island regions to have been sold as a summer retreat. Through the turn of the century, this region became a favorite summer retreat for the American elite, as many wealthy families purchased islands and constructed ever more elaborate and decorative cottages. Most of these homes were featured in tourist books of the time, since the many hotels also attracted the less affluent vacationers, and the homes of the millionaires were no less of interest to the tourists in the 1800s than they are today. Yet, photographs of the Deer Island structures are not as easy to locate, despite the fact that the island and its accoutrements were apparently no less elaborate and interesting as the many of the other cottages. At some date prior to 1949, Samuel Miller's son, George Douglas Miller, gave a building on the island to the Yale University Skull and Bones Society. This building was known as the Outlook and was built largely of stone with a wooden upper structure. It was reported to contain 15 rooms and housed a valuable collection of antiques and books. The building and its contents was destroyed by a fire in the late 1940s. The Skull and Bones Society currently appears to own the entire island, however. Of the original larger cottages on the island depicted in old postcards, only one remains, along with 2 or 3 smaller cottages. There are at least 3 obvious ruins on the island. So, the island is known for the skulls and bones, and yes, we are wrong thinking about deers living in that island. The island was named Deer Elande, which later became the Deer Island.
Number 3. Island of Dolls, Mexico. Just south of Mexico City, between the canals of Xochimilco, you can find a small island with a sad background which never intended to be a tourist destination. The island is known as Isla de las Muñecas, Island of the Dolls. There's just something really thrilling about a place with a dark and mysterious past. Take La Isla de las Muñecas for example. An island covered with decaying old dolls strung up in trees is pretty creepy on its own, even before you get to the dark origin story. The story of the island is intimately entwined with the story of Don Julian Santana Barrera, a native of Xochimilco, a borough of Mexico City. Don Julian left his wife and family sometime in the mid-20th century to sequester himself on an island on Texuilo Lake. His reasons for doing so are hazy at best, but soon became clear. Santa Barrera was not necessarily of sound mind. Not long after relocating, he made a chilling discovery on the shores of his island. The body of a young girl, drowned in the lake. A doll came floating down the canal shortly afterward, changing the course of Santana Barrera's life and the shape of the island for years to come. Alone on the island, Barrera took the doll and hung it from a tree in order to appease the spirit of the deceased girl. But, at least in the eyes of the man who now considers himself the island caretaker, the one doll was not enough. For the next 50 years, Santana Barrera would scrounge dolls from the trash and from the canals and hang them from the island's many trees. Some he'd hang whole, others in various states of disrepair, headless, torso-less, or taken apart in other ways. These don't sound like the actions of a person with a healthy grasp on reality, and indeed, there are many doubts surrounding this legend. The biggest question is the reality of the girl who died. Many people, including Don Julian's own family, didn't believe that he ever found the girl. Although, whether they believe he made it up, imagined the experience, or was somehow mistaken is unclear. What is clear is that whether the girl existed or not, Don Julian devoted the rest of his life to her. And perhaps, creepiest of all, even the end of his life had clear ties to the story of the drowned
Snake
child.
Island.
Clear ties to the story of the drowned
Snake
child.
Island. Known as Snake Island, the viper-infested Ilha de Coimada Grande sits in the Atlantic Ocean about 90 miles off the coast of southeastern Brazil. In there sits an island where no local would ever dare tread. Legend has it that the last fisherman who strayed too close to the shores of Snake Island was found days later adrift in his own boat, lying lifeless in a pool of blood. This mysterious island is so dangerous that Brazil has made it illegal for anyone to visit. And the danger on the island comes in from the form of a golden lancehead pit vipers, one of the deadliest snakes in the world. The lancehead can grow to be over 1.5 feet long, and it's estimated that there are between 2,000 and 4,000 of them on Snake Island. The lanceheads are so venomous that a human bitten by one could be dead within an hour. Snake Island is uninhabited now, but people used to live there for a short period of up to until the late 1920s when, according to the legend, the local lighthouse keeper and his family were killed by vipers that slithered in through the windows. Today, the Navy periodically visits the lighthouse for upkeep and makes sure no adventurers are wandering too close to the island. Another local legend claims that the snakes were originally introduced by pirates seeking to protect buried treasure on the island. In reality, the viper's presence is the result of rising sea levels. A less exciting origin story than paranoid pirates to be sure, but still interesting. Snake Island used to be a part of Brazil's mainland, but when sea levels rose over 10,000 years ago, it separated the landmass and turned it into an island. It's hard to imagine why anyone would want to visit a place where a painful death lurks every few feet. However, the viper's deadly venom has shown potential in helping to combat heart problems, leading to some of a black market demand for the venom. For some lawbreakers, the lure of the money is incentive enough to risk almost certain death on Snake Island. Number 1. Palmyra Atoll. Palmyra Atoll is located about 1,713 and 1,778 kilometers south of Honolulu. Palmyra Atoll was named on November 1, 1802 for the US ship Palmyra commanded by Captain Saul, but was probably first sighted 4 years earlier by Captain Edmund Fanning aboard the American ship Betsy. Palmyra Atoll is composed of about 50 islets forming a U-shape surrounded by a barrier reef. There is a lagoon to the west of the islets as well as within the central part of the U-shape which is open to the west. The islets are nearly flat with a maximum elevation of 2 meters, though trees up to about 25 meters tall make them look significantly higher. Palmyra Atoll has an equatorial climate that is hot and rainy. Do you know that the island was known as being the murder site of the San Diego couple? They had disappeared on August 29, 1974 after sailing about 970 miles south from Hawaii to the Palmyra Atoll. The home boat for their sailboat, the Seawind, was a marina on the Shelter Island and they were well known in the San Diego sailing community. The woman's remains was discovered in 1981 on the Palmyra beach. Her broken and bleached bones were spilling out of a half-buried metal chest that apparently had washed ashore, but her husband's body, presumed to have been dumped at the sea, has never been found. Now, which of those islands would you like to visit someday? Come tell us in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me today as we discover another strange creation in the world. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification. This is Electrotech 5 and we hope to see you in our next video.